So glad to have you all here. My name is Lindsay Swart. I am in the HSC Office for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and I am delighted to be able to present our speaker today for Hispanic Heritage Month. We love these opportunities to bring our two sides of the campuses together, and I know that our health profession side very much values having more access to humanities and those parts of the work that help us to really be able to connect with our community. So I am grateful for these partnerships. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little reading of who our presenter is today before turning it over. All right, so today we have a talk that's on called Literary Harvests, De Colores La Cosecha, and the work of Linda Morales Armas. And we have our presenter, Dr. Melina Vizcaíno-Alemán. So Melina is an associate professor in the Department of English Language and Literature at UNM, where she teaches in American Literary Studies and specializes in 20th century ethnic, Southwestern, and Chicanx literatures and cultural studies. She has published a book as well as several pieces on Mexican American literature, critical regionalism, and Chicana art, and has a forthcoming article, Pláticas en Place, Carlota Espinoza, Chicana Artist and the Venceremos Brigade, in Chiriquí, Latino Literatures, Arts, and Cultures. Currently, she is completing 2 book monographs, Chicana Desertscapes, Epistemologies of People and Place with Texas Tech UP, and Chicana Movements, Print Cultures and Literary Activisms, 1967 to 1983, with the University of Arizona Press. This presentation today is part of a chapter from Chicana Movements, a study of Chicana literary activisms in the printing press during El Movimiento Chicano. So I am very excited to hear about this talk because of the connection it has to our community. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Dr. Vizcaíno-Alemán.
Thank you so much. I want to first thank Dr. Lindsay Smart in the Health Sciences for reaching out to me, inviting me to participate in this DEI programming, spotlighting the humanities, and especially so much to Kendra Hill, who bailed me out just now, a technical issue. But she also organized this Zoom event and put together all the wonderful posters. They're so beautiful. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for committing an hour of your day to listen to me. So thank you so much. And the title of my talk draws on the rich literary traditions found in the journals De Colores and La Cosecha, produced in Albuquerque between 1973 to 1982 by editors, founders, and partners José Armas and Linda Morales Armas, both active in El Movimiento Chicano and champions of Raza literature, art, and culture. Armas worked for the Vista program in the years leading up to the civil rights era, and he continued to work on behalf of equal access in education after moving to Albuquerque with his wife, Linda Morales, who grew up in Laredo, Texas, and became a student of home economics at UNM, where she graduated with her Bachelor of Science from the College of Education in 1981. And that's actually per records that I found on the UNM digital repository. So this means Linda Morales Armas attended school and completed her undergraduate studies while also co-editing and producing De Colores, launching La Cosecha, and raising 2 daughters alongside her lifelong partner and spouse. And I'm sure this sounds familiar to any number of our students who juggle multiple responsibilities while also completing their degrees. So there's a lot of inspiration there. I'm also a former Lobo and a Lobo for life. So it's very familiar to me as well. And I became interested in Morales Armas's work when I began conceiving of a project on Chicanas and their participation in Chicano print culture. My work follows the lead of many others like Maria E. Cotera and Linda Garcia Merchant in their digital repository, Chicana por mi Raza, as well as the work of Marisela Chavez, Lorena Oropesa, and Dion Espinosa, who have recovered the work of activists like Elizabeth Petita Martinez and Enriqueta Vasquez, to name only two Chicanas who transformed Chicano print culture, but they're more well known, and also connected to New Mexico, Northern. Morales Armas is less visible in these discussions of Chicana activism, but her life and life's work form a major part of my current research. And the next slide, please. Thank you. So my talk comes from one of my two current book projects. It's the big one, Chicana Movements, Print Cultures and Literary Activisms, 1967 to 1983. It's currently under contract with the University of Arizona. And I have a deadline of March 31, 2026. So please be rooting for me so that I can actually finish the study. And I also want to thank Dr. Smart again. Love your name, by the way, Dr. Smart. It's for encouraging me to do this talk in particular. It's new material and it may be very raw, but it really gave me the chance to come back to this book because I'm working on the other one currently. So, Chicana Movements is a study of women's participation and making of Chicano revistas, or the print cultures of the movement, particularly the journals, newspapers, and magazines that formed and operated between 1967 to 1983. There are 7 revistas that I study in the book, each one the topic of a chapter or interchapter with a coda that extends past my targeted context of 1967 to 83, which is what many consider to be the rise and fall of the Chicano movement. The year 1983 saw the publication of Sherry Moraga and Gloria Anzaldua's This Bridge Called My Back, writings by radical women of color, as well as Evangelina Vigil's Hispanic Women Write, a special issue of Revista Chicano-Riqueña out of the University of Houston and in connection to Arte Público Press, which is a very significant press for works in my area. Vigil's edited issue is the topic of my last chapter, which is on Revista Chicano-Riqueña. While my first chapter focuses on the Crusade for Justice newspaper, El Gallo, La Voz de la Justicia, out of Denver, Colorado. So in between the first and the last chapter, I webbed together a handful of revistas that include 4 longer running titles. And what I mean by that is more than 5 years. So really not that long in the scheme of things. And then 3 shorter running titles, which is to say less than 2 years. So really short, really brief. And these shorter running titles include Comadre, La Cosecha, and Mango. So those are the shorter ones. These are the subjects of what I'm calling interchapters, and I'm kind of playing with that idea right now. But essentially, they're shorter discussions. They're not full-length chapters of these shorter running revistas, and then I combine those with longer chapters that focus on El Gallo, De Colores, and Maíz, which is a revista out of San Diego, and the Revista Chicano-Riqueña, which was first founded at the University of Indiana and then eventually landed at Houston. So Chicana Movements brings together 7 revistas from various archival collections that include university and public libraries from Albuquerque, Austin, Denver, and San Diego, as well as community archives in El Prado, New Mexico. At the same time, and following in the footsteps of Cotera, Garcia Merchant, Chavez, Oropeza, and Espinosa, all of the Chicana intellectuals that kind of come before me and that I'm really building off of, I incorporate entrevistas, or interviews with individuals who knew the women in my study and who graciously agreed to speak with me about their dearly departed mothers and friends. And I want to take the time now, publicly and vocally, to thank these individuals and acknowledge them by name, including J.A. and Zarife Dominguez and Father Pat Valdez in Colorado, Dr. Kathy Cordova, Frank Montoya, Julie Marquez, and Mónica Armas Aragon, who is Linda's daughter in New Mexico. And I even think Monica's here. So I thank you so much for being here. This also includes Gina Valdez and Dr. Rosaura Sanchez, who are both in San Diego and who have corresponded with me over email so far. And I still have yet to visit the UCSD Special Collections and Archives. I'm going in December, and I am going to meet Gina Valdez, who is another writer, Chicana artist who I'm discussing in the chapter on Maíz, and I am hoping to interview her as well. So it's still an ongoing project, as I mentioned, but I have so many people to thank. I especially want to acknowledge my comadre, Dr. Tessa Cordova, and Las Pistoleras Instituto Cultural del Arte in El Prado, New Mexico, for hosting me as a scholar in residence in December of 2024, and for cultivating the connections I needed to interview individuals for my first chapter on the Crusade for Justice newspaper, El Gallo, and the work of Juanita M. Dominguez. Tessa is the director of El Grupo Sangre de Cristo, a theater group that performs liturgical pieces, including an annual Los Pastores play in which Dominguez played El Diablo for many years. And so Tessa put me in touch with J.A. and Zarife Dominguez, the son and daughter of Juanita, and Kathy Cordova is Tessa's mom, who played Mary alongside Dominguez's Diablo. And then the other individuals I also interviewed were Julie Marquez, who currently plays El Diablo, and Frank Montoya, who plays El Ermitaño, or the Hermit. And I want to thank again all of my interviewees for their time, grace, and memories. This project really would not be what it is without those interviews. I will say I probably still could have completed the project just on the revistas without the entrevistas, but those interviews are really important. So Chicana Movements combines the print archive with interviews that make visible the important work of Chicanas who have gone unnoticed or unnamed. In conversation with people who knew them, the interviews that already exist in print and special collections and ones found online, I deploy a mixed methods approach, revistas and entrevistas, to discuss a handful of Chicanas and their literary activism in the print cultures of the movement. And let me spotlight briefly Juanita Dominguez to contextualize the project and to highlight its methodology. So the next slide, thank you so much. So here are a few images from the first volume and issue of El Gallo, which I retrieved from the newspaper collection in Denver, in the Denver Public Library's Western History and Genealogy Department. And this was on a RAT grant, which is awarded by university. So thank you, RAT grant. I hope I get another one so I could go to San Diego. I'm going no matter what. I just need a little bit of support. During this time when I went to Denver, I also interviewed J.A. and Zarife Dominguez, moving between the public library in downtown Denver and Zarife's kitchen, where she welcomed me with the home-cooked meal. And it was such an amazing experience. We had never met each other. We had only talked over the phone, so it was first in-person meeting. So a lot was, a lot of tension and stuff. So in addition to our invaluable interview, Zarife shared family memorabilia, artwork, and personal papers that one cannot find in a library. So the challenge I face as I go into this project is how to balance this material that I did find in the library with the interviews that I'm conducting in people's homes. These government archives, the print history tends to silence Chicana activism. So again, the reason why I think entrevistas are so important. So in the case of Juanita Dominguez, she translated Crusade leader Rudolfo Corky Gonzalez's 1967 epic poem, I Am Joaquin, which is really a foundational piece of work. But she was also a founding board member and production manager of El Gallo. So the very small image on the bottom to the left. You can't really read it, and it's not so much for readability. But there is a list of the editorial board, and she is listed as the production manager right after the editor, who at the time of the founding of the newspaper was Rudolfo Gonzalez himself, the leader of the Crusade for Justice, and also the author of I Am Joaquin. She was also an actress and performer. So if you look on the other side, on the right-hand side, these are pictures from the production of the play The Revolutionist, and she played La Mama, so you can see her on the bottom left-hand corner of that image. And she's actually standing with Rudolfo's son, who played the son in the play. So these are documents that I found in the print archive. So Juanita's very visible in the first and second volumes of El Gallo, but she goes silent in the paper, although she remained a very integral quote unquote voice of justice. She composed the ballad Yo Soy Chicano en route to the 1968 Poor People's March on Washington, D.C., as Armando B. Rendon tells it in his 1971 book, Chicano Manifesto, but more importantly, as J.A. Dominguez recounted in our interview. As a 12-year-old, J.A. traveled on a bus from California to the march on D.C. with his mom and members of El Teatro Campesino, while Zarife traveled by air with fellow Crusade for Justice activist John Harrow, who was at the time, but unbeknownst to Zarife, under FBI surveillance and later prosecuted and convicted of conspiracy, a story that El Gallo covered in the years between 1972 and 1975. So it's also really interesting how the interviews kind of coincide with the public record. El Gallo published Yo Soy Chicano in February 1972 in a Poesía de la Raza column, and by then the song had really become like the Chicano national anthem. But in the publication of the song, there is no author and no acknowledgement of Dominguez, who preferred to stay out of the spotlight and penned the song for the community and not for personal recognition, as both J.A. and Zarife told me during our interview. So perhaps digging her name out of the dustbin of history is not something that Dominguez herself would have wanted me to be doing, but her name in a footnote is what inspired this study in the first place. I Am Joaquin was first published as a bilingual chapbook by El Gallo Publications and republished in Arte Publico's 2001 Message to Aztlán, Selected Writings, a collection of poems, speeches, and plays Gonzalez composed between 1966 to 1980, many first published in El Gallo, including The Revolutionist, by the way, that is also included in the Message to Aztlán. Dominguez never received a byline or credit for translating the poem, a foundational epic that voiced a collective vision and message for the nationwide Chicano movement. Message to Aztlán includes a new translation of I Am Joaquin and footnotes Dominguez as the original translator. Though small and sidelined, this footnote nonetheless inspired me to look deeply within the pages of the Chicano Press to make visible the Chicanas who managed, edited, translated, and created art, criticism, and literature as makers and not just footnotes in Chicano print cultures. Searching for women in history requires that we do research, quote unquote, through the back door, in the words of Kathy Cordova, as she described the challenge in our December 2024 interview. The author of several books herself, Cordova continues to tell people stories and is a known educator and columnist for the Taos News. Thus, she is not only an interviewee in the first chapter of my book, but the focus of my coda and a fitting way to close my study. Cordova, who, by the way, is Tessa's mom, so there's also a long lineage there as well. She candidly spoke with me about Dominguez in our interview and shared a phrase that has inspired me ever since. A moment that took place in her living room and on her late dad's birthday, unbeknownst to me at the time until she told me, close to the holidays, and with the smell of her kitchen in the air. There is never a dull moment up in El Prado, where Cordova commands a busy schedule and made room for me as a scholar in residence, if not in limbo, looking for more than a footnote and finding a footing in Kathy's home. In doing research through the back door, Cordova meant that one must look through different channels to find women in history, perhaps not their own archives, but the archives of their husbands, fathers, brothers. Indeed, many of the women in the study co-edited and worked with their spouses or their brothers in solidarity to produce revistas, but have stayed outside of the spotlight. Domínguez en El Gallo, Morales Armas and De Colores, Celina Rojas Urista and Maíz, Chicano Arts and Literature Notebooks, co-founded with poet partner Alurista, whose name appears everywhere and all over El Gallo, De Colores, and his own Maíz. He's a very well-known poet alongside Gonzalez. In other instances, Chicanas embarked on their own printing enterprises and produced semi-self-sufficient and very short-lived, unfortunately, revistas that capture the activisms and broad range of Chicana print cultures in the years between 1967 and 1983. And so the next slide, if you could take us there. For instance, Comadre was a biannual journal that launched in 1977 out of the Santa Barbara City College. Though it only ran 4 issues, all signs indicate the editor's intent on keeping the journal alive. In the first issue of Volume 1, the editors explain, quote, "The seeds for Comadre were planted at a state meeting at La Raza Faculty Association of Community Colleges in April of 1976. We chose the name Comadre as connoting the special friendship of Chicanas today. It does not define the traditional religious co-parent relationship, but rather the supportive and empathetic relationship of hermanas de la raza," end quote. In spring 1978, so that actually comes from the first issue. Spring 1978 was the second issue. Fall 1978 was the third, and then they ran a last 4th one. So in the spring 1978 issue, the editors dedicate it to Martha Cotera, the mother of Maria Cotera, an inspiration for Chicana por mi raza, with a page full of Cotera's credentials. Addressing Cotera personally, the dedication exclaims, quote, "Gracias, comadre, for all your work and commitment to the Chicana," exclamation point, end quote. In addition to publishing creative works, Comadre published critical essays, interviews, biographical sketches, and annotated bibliographies. And this is the inside image here. And the logo for the journal features an oversized nopal cactus with a barefoot woman, hair loose, and holding a pistol in the ready. A pistolera, to be sure. And I chose this one especially for my comadre Tessa because the name of her cultural institute is, well, Las Pistoleras. So it's a fitting image. Speaking by, for, and about Chicanas, Comadre also speaks to Chicanas in a tone of hermanadad, not hermandad, a widespread Chicana sisterhood. Comadre forms an inner chapter following El Gallo, and the two set the tone and structure for my study overall. So if you could go to the next slide, I'll finally get to what the title promised. De Colores and La Cosecha follow in a subsequent chapter and interchapter. The first issue of De Colores, Journal of Emerging Raza Philosophies, premiered in 1973 as a quarterly journal that ran across consecutive years and sometimes as a double issue to minimize the cost of production. With an editorial team of 12 individuals, 4 of them women in this specific issue, and the number changed throughout the different issues, but there was always a handful of women on the editorial board. Editor José Armas opens the first volume by explaining the need and mission of the journal with a long editorial note on the state of the Chicano movement and quote-unquote gabacho co-optation by mainstream media. The circumstance of an internal crisis takes shape when Armas contends, quote, "We must not be afraid to study and self-criticize along with romanticizing and dreaming. We must look at ourselves in light of what is happening today and find ways to absorb the estudiante and the Chicano professional in such a way that we do not lose them, and at the same time maintain our cultural identity and improve our economic conditions, end quote. The rise of a professional raza class by 1973 is clear, and the gulf between academia and organizing wide, a theme and dilemma that carry through in the interviews, poetry, essays, and fiction that populate the journal in its near 10-year run. As a Chicana academic, with one foot in the university and another in the kitchens and living rooms of raza homes, the theme and dilemma resonate. Armas brings forth the journal as a forum, quote, for dialectical examination and critical introspection, which have currently been lost by many who are too busy at the local tasks of organizing and educating raza communities, end quote. The didactic reasons for the journal are clear, and the role of the women is critical to the back and front ends of the journal and its offshoot, La Cosecha. The title, De Colores, draws on the song of that same name and the common music of a people, made critical in a journal of quote-unquote emerging philosophies that would run for a total of 6 volumes between 1973 and 1982. Its offshoot, Pajarito Publications, would continue publishing books of all genres, including oral interviews, fiction, poetry, and criticism, even after the journal ceased publication. The first issue of Volume 1, as you can see in terms of the contents, the contenido, opens with an entrevista con Reyes López Tijerina, conducted in Spanish with a preface in English and interspersed with select captions in translation. So the interview itself is in Spanish, it's introduced in English, and then there are these captions where there's select translations. So in the preface, which again is in English, Armas acknowledges that Tijerina is quote-unquote controversial, but contends, quote, his dynamic personality is only a part of him. The following interview, we believe, points out his perspectives continue to be an important voice for all raza. The issue, that's end quote. The issue of a new quote-unquote brotherhood awareness comes to the fore and in the interview, and Chicanas fall out of visibility in this discussion, but were key to making De Colores. And the same can be said of El Gallo, whose inaugural headline championed Tijerina's not guilty verdict in federal charges connected to his actions in a Tierra Maria courthouse in 1967. So I don't know if you noticed, but one of the images on that previous slide of El Gallo was the headline, the very first story that El Gallo ran, and it was announcing the not guilty verdict. And Tierra Maria is in northern New Mexico. It's a huge headline in 1967 when that happened. So buried in the pages of El Gallo are the women who showed up to do the community work and organize. And we see a common theme already across the first issues of El Gallo and De Colores in the figure of Tijerina. Morales Armas is not so much buried as she is imprinted in the pages of De Colores, as the transition from the first to the second volume, so the first to the second year, makes evident in the material culture and more critically in the quote-unquote we of Armas's prefatory remarks. So in a 2017 essay, Armas recounts the journey to establish De Colores in the collective quote-unquote we, to impart the critical role Linda played in making the journal a success. And this essay actually comes from an entire special issue in the journal Dialogo, if anyone's interested. So again, this information, like the work on the revistas, is not something that I'm starting. There's already a lot out there. I think the difference is the journals that I'm focusing on and the angle that I'm taking to those journals. So Linda Morales Armas created the cover design for the second issue of De Colores, a bird who appears to be singing and is stylized in the form of pre-Columbian art. So that's the next slide. So this is issue 2, volume 2, number 2. That's the cover. And then over here is a list of the contributors. Again, it's really small. The most important one for me, at least, is the one at the bottom. And it is a brief biography of Linda Morales Armas. And I'll actually read it. And then there is a credit given to her for the cover design. Um, the cover image to this issue includes the names of its contributors and opens with an entrevista con Octavio Paz. So much like the first issue, this one opens with an interview. And Octavio Paz, very well-known Mexican philosopher. So as Armas explains in 2017, quote, I received a fellowship to MIT that allowed joint enrollment at Harvard. I knew that Paz taught there one semester and I enrolled in his class. Since he refused to return my phone calls, I was able to get him to let me interview him during his office hours, and the experience was included in one of the issues of De Colores, end quote. So like with Tijerina's interview, Armas includes some prefatory remarks on Paz before the interview, which curiously enough tell a slightly different version of this story than his 2017 essay. So as Armas tells it in 1975, Paz bailed more than once on the interview, and Armas, quote, dropped both his courses, then decided to call one last time. I believe he sensed my anger and invited me to his apartment so we could do our interview, end quote. And that comes from this issue. So the interview takes place in Paz's apartment, not the office, where Armas meets his French wife. And in the interview, Paz views women's liberation as quote unquote positivo en general. So generally positive, but he reserves little to say about it specifically. So there is a question about feminism and, you know, what are Paz's thoughts about it? And those are his thoughts. That, well, generally they're positive. Then he doesn't really say anything about it after that. Off the record, however, the two confab, as Armas continues in the preface, quote, when I turned off the tape recorder and began to collect my things to leave, our talk took on a more relaxed and free discussion. We talked more about the women's liberation movement being an extension to the white man's tentacles, end quote. Which there was like, that's all you're going to say? What else? That's a lot. So the special issue on La Mujer that appear after this entrevista articulate and develop the question of feminism and Chicana literary activism in the pages of De Colores. And really, I think what this issue doesn't ever get to. So subsequent issues do. Mexico City, by the way, hosted the International Women's Year Conference in 1975, and that is the same year that De Colores ran Paz's interview. So I think these are conversations that are really circulating nationwide, if not internationally. So after this issue, we get a special issue on La Mujer in De Colores, edited by Elena Quintana. By this time, Morales Armas had become a staple in the De Colores editorial staff. So year 2 is when Linda Morales Armas appears in the editorial staff and then continues to appear all throughout. She lent her creative vision and her artwork of a woodcut image that would become the logo for Pajarito Publications. So it's not only the cover image here, but it also becomes the logo for the press. Which the couple operated out of their garage. With the Pajarito image in the background and the names of contributors overlaid over it in the foreground, the visual imagery captures in simple but profound form the role Morales Armas played in the journal's philosophy and design. In a brief biography, which again is over here, readers learn, quote, Linda Morales Armas is from Laredo, Texas. She has worked with community and school issues in Old Town Barrio of Albuquerque. She is currently a student at the University of New Mexico, end quote. The cover image to the second issue of Volume 2 is a quiet but visible imprint of Morales Armas. More than a visual sign, the Pajarito image imprints Morales Armas's place and forever stamps her presence in the print history of De Colores and Pajarito Publications. Morales Armas took on a more active role as the Colores gained momentum, and in 1976 co-edited La Cosecha, an attempt at creating an independent journal dedicated to Chicana issues. And that's my next and last slide. Thank you. The journal only ran one issue, and that's this one over here on the left side, and never quite got off the ground, becoming a one-time revista to which I nonetheless devote an interchapter in the book because I think it's that important. Morales Armas co-edited another special issue in 1978, and that's the other one on the other side, entitled La Cosecha, the Harvest, the Chicana Experience. Morales Armas, Sue Melina, and Teresa Marquez co-edited the first Cosecha, the one in 1976, while Quintana, that is Elena Quintana, joined Morales Armas and Molina to co-edit the second, the one in 1978. In between these two issues, the subtitle to the De Colores changed to, quote, Journal of Chicano Expression and Thought, which is somewhat different from what it was before. These two cosechas, so to speak, spotlight how Chicanas are textually in the middle of this name change, but ironically subsumed by Chicano expression and thought. This was, to be sure, the inspiration for a new journal. As Morales Armas writes in the introduction to the 1976 Cosecha, quote, Chicana expression and thought has come into its own, end quote. This moment of reckoning occurs not within emerging Raza Philosophies, but as Chicana expression and critical thought on their own terms, or at least an attempt to be on their own terms. Morales Armas continues, quote, there is a clear void of documentation and of journals to present the case for the Mujer Chicana. There is a need to gather and share common experiences and thoughts, a need to critically analyze ourselves to determine who we are, what we want, and where we are going. This study and reflection is what will provide a road to achieving our self-identity and further the total liberation of the pueblo Chicano, end quote. Thus opens La Cosecha, a slim little revista subdivided into two sections and marking Morales Armas's vision and voice in a powerful statement on Chicana criticism and creativity. Composed in English, Spanish, and a mix of both languages, both cosechas bring together critical essays that pinpoint the issues facing modern Chicanas. The 1976 cosecha is again subdivided in two sections. The first one with 5 essays from the 1975 meeting of the Congress of Inter-American Women Writers, which took place in Pittsburgh, with Sylvia Gonzalez as guest editor. So there's actually like 4 women editors of this issue. Gonzalez also provides an overview of the 1975 meeting and highlights the main themes and dilemmas facing Chicanas at the conference, including language barriers, educational gaps, and class divisions, all of which affect the themes and dilemmas of the Chicana writer. Other essays explore more fully these themes. Quote, by becoming a writer, says Rita Sanchez, the Chicana has to have already rebelled against a socialization process that would have her remain merely the silent helpmate, end quote. For Marcela Trujillo Gaitan, quote, the modern Chicana faces a double conflict. On the one hand, she must overcome Chicano family overprotection, and on the other, she faces contempt from the outside world as she emerges into the professional world, only to find indifference as answers to her questions on reality and life, end quote. This quote-unquote double oppression that comes from being both women and ethnic is common today, and it sets the tone for the 1975 Cosecha, which opens with Evangelia Enriquez and Alfredo Mirande's essay, Liberation Chicana Style, Colonial Roots of Feministas Chicanas. Ironically, this essay argues that, quote, Chicana feminism is unique and not subsumable under either the women's movement or the Chicano movement, end quote. This cosecha is subsumed under the Journal of Chicano Expression and Thought, but together with its predecessor, they foreground the quiet force of Morales Armas and Chicana critical expression. The second section of the 1976 Cosecha, for instance, includes a pictorial essay on Frida Kahlo with images, poetry by Martina Rivera, Luis Talamantes, Marcela Aguiar, and Francisco Lomelí, and a short story by Lucha Corpi. The slim revista is distinctive for its thematic focus and critical inquiry, but also for its visual features that include the cover art by Sue Martinez, and that's this one over here, the 1976 one. So as Morales Armas explains, quote, the cover design is an illustration for a poem entitled Justice, My Cell and I, written by Luis Talamantes. Both are part of their forthcoming book, end quote. Talamantes, by the way, was a member of the San Quentin Six, a group of men who stood trial for conspiracy and murder after a prison riot broke out in 1971 in response to an inmate's death at the hands of prison guards. 2 inmates and 3 guards died in the riot, and the San Quentin Six underwent one of the longest trials in California history, but were finally acquitted in 1974. Talamantes began writing poetry in prison, and the poem Olga from the section in La Cosecha also appears in his collection, Life Within the Heart in Prison, published with Martinez's image. So this is one of the images that is published in that other book. Olga, the poem, is a tribute to Olga Talamante, who was a political prisoner for 16 months in Argentina from 1974 to 75, and whose letters were published in El Gallo to rally support for the Olga Talamante Defense Committee. The poem opens, quote, Olga, I am Luis. We share much between us, I believe, both big and small, except possibly for a Z that either got tacked on or lost somewhere in our past, end quote. The two never met, as the first lines indicate, but their experiences in prison form a bond between them that, quote, goes beyond simple letters, end quote. Olga is like a personal letter to a fellow prisoner set free. The Z in the poet's last name, a lingering reminder of their differences, even if they are the same. So Luis is Talamantes with the Z, Olga is Talamante without the Z. So that's the key distinction he's referring to. Here is an expression of Chicana critical thought in Chicano poetry in a revista dedicated to La Mujer Chicana. The nuances of Chicana critical thought and expression are many and not separate from Chicano struggles, though the need for a separate journal emerges by, for, and about its own Chicana philosophy never quite gets off the ground. In the 1978 Cosecha, which includes a cover image of a modern Chicana looking down in laughter, a brief and anonymous introduction prepares the reader with a quick comment on the quote-unquote immediate task of Chicana self-definition. Quote, the old days are gone, traditions are not what they were and never will be. And if there are fundamental differences, i.e. culture, racism, class values, etc., between Chicanas and the white woman, then the need for self-definition is even more acute. Identity must be clear and solid before fundamental building can take place. We believe this third special issue on Chicanas contributes toward that end, self-definition through affirmation, analysis and creative expression, and ultimately toward the total liberation of our pueblo, end quote. This message of intellectual inquiry and cultural expression is clear and resonates from the first issue of the volume all the way through the journal's end run and in books published by Pajarito Publications afterward. 4 critical essays open this special issue on Chicanas, followed by selections of poetry and fiction in English, Spanish, and a mix of both. What interests me is the way Chicana literary activisms take shape and at the same time shape Chicano print culture. So I'll conclude my talk with a very short vignette from the 1978 Cosecha in an attempt to sort of gather the many points in my presentation before we have some time for discussion, hopefully. And the piece that I'm going to be referencing is Judy Gonzalez Flores's poem, Julieta's Muses. It's an experiment in archetype and form, and it's composed in 2 paragraphs. So it's considered a poem, but it's actually more like a vignette. And it's not a typical verse or stanza poem. Dreamlike, The poem goes into Julieta's unconscious, where she, quote, longs to compose a few lines, end quote, and then awakens to a decision. Either spend time with her girlfriends, passing leaflets announcing, quote, the Mujeres' first literary magazine, or shall she help the Vatos organize the workers' march? Question mark, end quote. Julieta decides to join her girlfriends and declares, quote, we will write of swirling images, human love, liberation, God, rosas que brotan, almas hondas y satisfechas, our muses, sensual, impish, shall guide our awareness. Of consciousness, we shall create. In the next paragraph, however, and in a moment of defiant declaration, Julieta pulls back and berates herself. And I'll end this talk with the entire paragraph because, first of all, I think it's very beautiful. And secondly, I think it really captures all the nuances and contradictions of much of this material that I'm talking about. So, quote, oh, how Julieta berates herself, her poetry, remembering her sadness, her despondency with the vatos, who tease the women for their silly endeavors. The lines of sensual poetry drift into semi-consciousness. Quote, Julieta, heart fond of love, of passion, brown eyes like diamonds radiate life and the need for joy, end quote. She remembers her lover, his vibrating touch and soft words of encouragement. How long has she been without him? Yet she can remember his steady, true assurance that her seeking is right and true. Why can the others not be as he is? Why the taunting? She can write and will of liberation, of human life bursting to the copet of the goblet. Then Julieta becomes a river, flowing water of past, present, of future. For there has never been a yesterday. Every day is a today. The river bears her name and flows onward, giving life as holy water of bygone rituals. Thank you.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Let's pause and open it up for questions or comments or dialogue. Feel free to just unmute. It's probably the simplest way if you'd like to, or if you'd like to send anything in the chat, I can read it too.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for your kind notes. Thank you so much. I see a few of my students, so thank you. And want to again, my comadre Tessa was here. Thank you. Monica, I'm so happy to see you and everyone else in the audience. I am happy to take questions or comments.
What's the most surprising thing you've found so far in your archivist, your research for the work?
Most surprising. I don't think it's surprising because I think I already knew. I mean, I wouldn't have been embarking on this project in the first place, but just how many Chicana voices that there are in these journals and in the print material record, and but there's also at the same time, there's a lot of missing information that, that's not there. Like, for instance, these two special issues, these two cosechas, as I'm calling them, they include, a lot of names, some that are known, like Luis Talamantes is very well known, Olga Talamantes, more well known. Lucha Corpi has become much more well known in the contemporary times. But then there are all these other names and individuals where there's no biographical information about them in those journals. I think in the early iterations of De Colores, there was an attempt to kind of include biographical information, thankfully, particularly with regard to Linda and what I'm doing with my work, But there's all these other, named people, but still there's all this missing information that, we don't know who they were, where were they? Did they have like, were they a university person? Were they, what was their affiliation? And so there's just a lot more there that I think it's could be overwhelming
Mhm.
because it's very difficult to write a book, like number one, to kind of figure out like what do you include and where do you stop. Um,
Mhm.
a lot of it has to do with access. I'm for one, I'm largely staying close to home in terms of what research I'm doing. The good thing is a lot of these things are digitized now, so they're more easily accessible. Um, but each one of these chapters could be a book all on its own. I mean, the work on the colores, that alone, that could be its own book. And I think it could be probably multiple books. And could probably be one that I could do, perhaps, because it is local. And I think a lot of the people, connected to Morales Armas, they could be, and if you find the right connections, you know, you could probably create that, make that happen. Um, in terms of connections, it's a good thing Monica works for UNM because that was really the connection, right? We're both UNM employees, and if you log into the directory, then you have access to people's emails. So I mean, the fact that that's probably surprising was like how easy it was for me to contact her and her to be like, well, yes, I will speak with you. And then I'm like, well, now what do I do? Now I'm really on the hook. So yeah, Tessa has a question.
With you because I know Jose and great work that they really well. Their work around people in the Mexico field, so there's a lot of work there that they did there, and that's where I met them. We've gone around to in Mexico, so there's more activism in that spring in New Mexico too. So there's all these ties and all these unions.
It's kind of hard to hear you, but so that's my Dr. Cordova, my second Dr. Cordova. The first Dr. Cordova is Dr. Kathy Cordova, and then the second Dr. Cordova is
Sorry,
Tessa.
sorry. Can you hear now? Can you hear
Yes,
now?
yes, we can hear you.
I'm sorry. Just their work with the Hispano Roundtable in New Mexico as well. Is also another layer I think that kind of connects with the work of Juanita Dominguez too, and their connection to the Crusade for Justice. Because there was just like these layers and these like these beautiful tapestries and these weavings that can take place, and the connections can continue to be made, and it just depends on the commitment. But you say it's close to home, but it's very important to have scholars that are committed to the work almost to our own death for ourselves.
Yeah,
So I know one.
and I
Funny.
will say also, like, it's not just a given that, oh, I grew up here and I'm from here, so I just have an automatic access to this work and these communities. And the truth is, it is not. It takes a lot of, connection and, the right contacts and also just the right attitude and approach. I mean, I'm a
Yeah.
scholar. I was trained in the archive and my first book, when Lindsay asked me like, "Oh, well maybe we'll buy your book for our book club." And I'm kind of like, "Well, maybe not that one." That one, I don't know about that one. That one's very academic and it's
This
not.
one, we're gonna push you
Yes,
to write
this
this one
one.
so we can buy this one, especially now that we know it's such a big connection to our institution as a whole and the hospital. So multiple
Yeah.
copy.
And something I didn't talk about or I haven't, had the time to really delve into that is also the connection to the hospital, because Linda worked for the hospitals for, the duration of her life, and there was that connection. And I didn't go there. I think maybe we thought maybe there was that connection because, it's for HSC and, the humanities. I think certainly it's there. Like I said, a lot of this material is very raw and it's still developing. And actually, it got me back to the project. And this, this material, I'm ready to write my chapter, and to do more with the interview. I did interview Monica. We did have our interview. So there is that material that, I need to take into consideration, but it's a different kind of care and, attention than the print archive, So, but yeah, I thank you.
Well, I know we're at the 3 o'clock hour and folks might need to transition, but I want to say thank you again, how wonderful this was. I was Googling all of the things like the I am Joaquin poem and Yo soy Chicano were things that I think I knew the Yo soy Chicano from the movement, but I wasn't familiar with the I am Joaquin. So have a moment of reading through many things that you mentioned, and grateful for that, and grateful for you all for being here to join in this talk.
Thank you so much again. Kendra, you're a lifesaver. I'm sorry I
Agreed.
again took a little time at the beginning.
Hey,
but
it's not Zoom. It's not Zoom unless there's a problem.
Thank you so much to those community members who showed up. I'm so happy. Thank you. And if anyone has contact or wants to reach out to me, has information, I'm the student here, really. I'm still learning as well. So I'm open to any and all information folks have to share with me. So thank you so much.
And I wonder, the more you talk about it publicly, the more people might just reach out, being like, oh yes, I had a copy of that. I don't know if you've been on radio to just talk about it too, because I feel like that's as I was thinking, I was like, that's like the way, like I think of all the little things that I pick up at random places and read through them, and think you never get to track it formally, but it exists and people were touched by it. So I'm sure people will.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll see where this thing goes.
I'm following
it's a
you.
work in progress. And now everybody knows. So I said it, I put it out in the world, and now I need to finish it.
Yeah, we will nurture it.
I will. Thank you so
Wonderful.
much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Take care.